You're probably familiar with the idea that Halloween treats may not be safe. It's a warning that's given to nearly every trick-or-treater by their parents, teachers, or other adults.
You see, some people think it's fun to play tricks with your treats.
These warnings may make you think that there are people out there who want to hurt trick-or-treaters. But actually, cases of Halloween sadism, or the act of strangers giving children contaminated or tampered candy on Halloween, are rare, and reports of serious injury even rarer. Tales of tampered treats are an urban legend, the result of terrible pranks, hoaxes, or, in one prominent case, the tragic murder of a child by his father. But even though the concept of widespread Halloween tampering has been debunked, fears of tampered treats persist. And for decades, one Halloween treat has been at the center of it all: the apple with a razor inside. A razor and an apple became the poster child for American fears of Halloween sadism. But why apple specifically? And why do Americans continue to fear what might be lurking inside their children's candy bags? Before the late 1960s, media reports of razors and apples were rare. Most stories I found were related to prisons. One case in 1952 involved an inmate in Alabama who bit into an apple left for him by his wife, only to find it filled with several pieces of razor blade. It's not clear why the inmate's wife put the razor pieces in the apple, but it's possible she was trying to smuggle it into the prison. Either that or she really hated her husband. There were also reports of prisons using X-ray machines to screen foods for sharp or dangerous contraband, including razors and apples. A razor and an apple wasn't even the earliest case of Halloween sadism I came across while researching. That dubious honor goes to mothballs. Yep, mothballs. Those small balls of pesticides used to protect wool clothes from moths and other insects. Between 1957 and 1958, there were at least 2 cases of adults dropping mothballs into the sacks of unsuspecting trick-or-treaters. The 1958 incident involved a Navy lieutenant in California. The lieutenant gave mothballs to children as a, quote, big joke. Now, if you've ever come across a mothball, you'll know that they have a particular odor. It's not subtle. But you might not notice that odor if you have a bad cold, which is what happened to Pat, a 6-year-old and one of the unlucky recipients of the mothballs. Pat didn't realize the round treat in his Halloween bag wasn't candy until he, quote, bit it open. Don't worry, it seems like Pat was unharmed. His father reported the incident to police, who handed the case of the, quote, mothball jokester to the Navy Shore Patrol, and the story soon faded from headlines. It wasn't until the mid-1960s that cases of razors and apples given to trick-or-treaters began to appear in newspapers. In 1966, a few reports came out of Canada, including one of a 6-year-old finding a razor blade in an apple. The next year, there were more. At least 9 cases initially reported in Virginia, New Jersey, Ottawa, and Toronto, with no discernible link between the different communities and no serious injuries. Then in 1968 and 1969, there were too many to count, with incidents spread across the United States and Canada. Such reports of tampered treats resulted in New York Times journalist Judy Klimsrud publishing an article titled, "Those Treats May Be Tricks." Take, for example, that plump red apple that Junior gets from a kindly old woman down the block. It may have a razor blade hidden inside. Klimsrud might have been right about the treats being tricks. But the trickster wasn't necessarily a kindly old woman down the block. In some cases, it was the very trick-or-treaters the tampered treats were intended to harm. We'll be right back. Enjoying this video? Please consider giving it a like, a comment, or subscribing to my channel below. Thank you, and now back to the video. Not all newspapers follow up on the results of police investigations into tampered Halloween candies. Once the shock of a razor blade and an apple faded away and November wore on, updates on Halloween tampering cases became fewer and fewer. But sometimes the culprit is caught. Such is the case in Philadelphia in 1969. On Halloween night, 12-year-old Grace was making the rounds trick-or-treating in her Torresdale neighborhood with her sister and friends. Among the treats she collected was an apple from Jack Thomas, a foundry worker who lived across the street. Grace then discovered that the apple had a razor in it. Police arrested Thomas that night on charges of assault with intent to maim and cruelty to minors. The next day, Jack Thomas was brought before municipal court judge Benjamin Siegel. Thomas denied that he had put the razor into the apple, but Judge Siegel wasn't buying it. He set the bail at $10,000, noting, "It's too bad there isn't a whipping post here." Thomas, who was unemployed with a sick wife, couldn't make bail, and so he stayed in jail. The case was just one of about 25 reported incidents of children being given tampered treats or pills and capsules in Philadelphia. City Police Commissioner Frank A. Rizzo said that all cases would be investigated and arrests made against those responsible. "This makes me sick. What sick minds would do something like this to our young?" Rizzo wasn't the only one who thought so. According to newspaper reports, threats were made to burn down Jack Thomas's apartment. While the police and judge seemed sure of Jack Thomas's guilt, not everyone was so quickly convinced. A guard at the housing unit where Thomas lived doubted Grace's story. He convinced detectives to take a second look. Grace and two of her friends, who she went trick-or-treating with, were brought in for further questioning. When police told the girls they didn't believe their stories, the children admitted to making the whole thing up. Thomas had given Grace an apple, but it didn't have a razor. It had a bruise. According to police, Grace was going to throw the apple away, but then her friend suggested that she tell her mother she'd found a razor in it. The girls even got a razor blade to use as proof. To confirm the new story, Grace and her friends took lie detector tests, which police said that they passed. After being in prison since Halloween, Jack Thomas was released on November 5th and returned home to his wife and 3 children. His arrest record was expunged, and he told the Philadelphia Daily News that he bore no animosity towards his accusers. "You never know what kids are going to do." Now, you may be wondering why Grace and her friends would do such a thing. Dr. Jill Best, a former professor of sociology and criminal justice, who is the foremost expert on Halloween candy tampering, may have the answer.
You can find something. You can find a pin, right? And you know it's easy to find a pin. It's easy. You find a candy bar, and you stick the pin in, and then you run in and say to mom, "Look, mom, look what I found in my candy bar," and you are rewarded with the concerned attention of grown-ups. And this is. I don't think it's amazing. And you think about Halloween as sort of a holiday of pranking. We're tipping over outhouses, which turns into TPing trees, which and this is the same kind of thing. It's a little bit of mischief.
At the time, an editorial in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram likened the incident in Philadelphia to Salem nearly 300 years earlier. Witches in 1692, Halloween razor blades in 1969. Ingredients for a sensation when blended with the childish human temptation to exploit a situation and grab center stage. Prank, hoax, or otherwise, tales of tampering struck a chord with the public. As the Munchie Star Press published in 1968,
there is a reaction of horrified revulsion at the sick cruelty of subjecting children in their innocence to such harm.
Others called for certain treats to be refused or Halloween to be canceled altogether.
I would advise children to refuse apples while this is going on. But still, whoever would do this would find other methods. It's up to the parents to supervise their children Halloween night and inspect the candy.
Why don't we recognize that in the context of the times in which we are living, it is no longer safe for the innocent to ring doorbells and accept goodies indiscriminately?
So why were people so quick to believe in Halloween sadism?
This isn't anything that's terribly pathological. I think it's just it's a way of saying, it's a dangerous world. We can't, we can't trust people.
Since the 1960s, Halloween sadism has taken on new forms, typically reflecting contemporary fears. In the 1970s, the fear was LSD. In the early 2020s, it was rainbow fentanyl. But the fear of razors and apples has remained consistent throughout, so much so that the phenomena was dubbed the razor blades in the apple syndrome by Sylvia Gritter in 1982, and Dr. Jill Best and Gerald T. Horauchi titled their 1985 paper on Halloween sadism, The Razor Blade in the Apple, The Social Construction of Urban Legends. As a child in the 1990s, we threw out the apples and anything that wasn't prepackaged and sealed. And in modern times, jokes about razors and apples continue to populate social media sites like Reddit. So why does the image of an apple of a razor continue to resonate? First, apples and Halloween have a long history together. In Ireland and Scotland, where many Halloween traditions originate, apples are ready to harvest in late August through October, making them a perfect addition to early Halloween rituals. When Scottish and Irish immigrants came to the United States, they brought Halloween and its incorporation of apples with them. Apples were not only featured in Halloween foods, but also games. There was, of course, Bobbing for Apples and Snap Apple, a game in which players try to take a bite of an apple on a string without using their hands. Apples also featured heavily in the mystic side of Halloween and were used to predict the future. Unmarried women would par an apple and throw the peel over their shoulder. The thrown peel would be studied to find the initial of the woman's future sweetheart. Women were also instructed to eat an apple in front of a mirror where their lover would appear to ask for the last bite. As Halloween transitioned to a night of trick-or-treating, apples transitioned with it. Apples were a common treat for Halloween beggars. As one 1950s newspaper stated, "When Halloween ghosts and goblins come calling for trick-or-treats, you'll want to be prepared with plenty of good spook food for handouts, and bright red apples are the best of all." Second, and a bit more speculatively, apples are a big part of American culture. Apples aren't native to the US, but they've been here for centuries. The tall tale of Johnny Appleseed planting apple trees as he traveled west is part of American mythology. Ralph Waldo Emerson called apples America's national fruit. To say something is American as apple pie is to imply something is quintessentially American. One of our most iconic cities, New York, is nicknamed the Big Apple. And even today, apples are one of the most popular fruits in the US. Apples are seen as healthy, wholesome, and good. An apple a day keeps the doctor away, or so the saying goes. If American society is perceived to have degraded so much that we can't trust apples given to children on Halloween, what can we trust? As a final note, I'll reiterate that cases of Halloween tampering are rare and many are false. That's not to say that all cases are hoaxes. There would be no way to prove that. There are too many reports with too little public follow-up in newspaper archives. Many historic police records have since been destroyed, and some cases may have never been reported at all.
It isn't something that really lends itself to multiple regression analyses. It's there's no data set. It's the absence of evidence.
But as Dr. Jill Best told NPR's Morning Edition in 2023,
I have data going back to 1958, and I have yet to find a report of a child that's been killed or seriously hurt by a contaminated treat picked up in the course of trick-or-treating.
Despite the idea of widespread treat tampering being largely debunked, fears seem to reawaken every Halloween.
We have the sense that the future is uncertain, and how can we control it? And one of the ways that we do this is we become very concerned about the safety of children.
One of the taglines that I use in interviews sometimes is, a contemporary legend is harder to kill than a vampire. Because it will just come back. And it comes back again, and you don't need to, but you can dress it in new clothing. Like fentanyl. But for the most part, the interesting thing about 2022 was that is so much more attention given to Halloween sadism in that one year than in any other time. And it was already, well debunked, had been well debunked for decades, and it's still got authoritative action.
Doesn't seem like this urban legend is going anywhere anytime soon. I guess if I was going to personally pretend something in my candy bag was tampered with, I'd go for the apple. No sense in harming perfectly good Halloween candy if fruit is available. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel below. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.